The quiet town of Maplewood was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. Life there was predictable. Sunrises over green hills, neighbors who waved at each other every morning, and the rustling sound of oak trees that had stood through generations. In a cozy cottage on Willow Lane lived 80-year-old George Whitman, a man who defied every stereotype about aging. Most mornings, people in town would see George jogging past the bakery. His pace light, steady, and enviable. He wore a bright blue windbreaker and matching sneakers. His silver hair swept back and eyes sparkling with a kind of energy not typically seen in someone his age. Kids whispered that he had a secret. Adults assumed it was genetics. But George knew better. It wasn't magic, it was mindset, discipline, and lessons learned through a lifetime of change. It all began years ago when George turned 60. He had retired early from his job as a history teacher and thought retirement would be restful. It wasn't. In fact, it hit him like a truck. His days felt long and unstructured. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 5 years earlier, and his adult children lived out of state. The house echoed with silence. He often sat on the porch, watching squirrels and wondering what came next. One rainy afternoon, he stumbled across an old VHS tape in the attic. It was labeled Whitman Family, 1985. Curiosity got the best of him. He dug out an old player and pushed the tape in. The screen flickered and suddenly, there they were, Margaret, young and glowing, dancing in the kitchen. His kids laughing, spinning around the room, and George himself, full of life and mischief, holding the camera. The video stirred something inside him. He remembered how full his life used to be, not because of work or routine, but because of how engaged he had been. George realized that age hadn't stolen his vitality. He had slowly given it away, piece by piece, through neglect, grief, and surrender. That night, George sat down with a notepad. At the top he wrote, "Reverse the clock." The first step was his body. At 60, he could barely touch his toes. His knees ached, his back hurt, and his energy waned by afternoon. He knew change wouldn't come overnight. So he started small. Every morning, he stretched for 5 minutes on his bedroom floor. It hurt, but he kept at it. Then he added short walks around the block. Those became mile-long hikes, and eventually, he found a small gym run by a retired Marine named Mike Carter, who offered senior fitness classes. Mike didn't treat George like an old man. "Age is a number," he said. "Movement is medicine." George trained under Mike's guidance for years. He learned to lift weights safely, practiced yoga, and even joined a weekend pickleball league. By 70, George was doing push-ups better than most men in their 40s. But his transformation wasn't just physical. George knew the brain was a muscle too. He took up reading again, books he never had time for before. He joined a local book club, even though he was the oldest member by decades. Young people gravitated toward him, eager to hear stories of Woodstock, old cars, and a world before smartphones. One day, he met a young woman named Claire at the library. She was studying neuroscience at a nearby college and was intrigued by George's sharp mind and energy. "You're like an anomaly," she said. "Most people your age aren't doing half the things you're doing." George chuckled. "It's not that I'm special. I just refused to stop." Claire invited him to give a talk at her university's Aging Research Symposium. George was hesitant at first, but she insisted. They need to see what's possible. At the symposium, George stood before a room of students and professors. He wore a crisp button-up shirt, stood tall, and spoke with clarity. He didn't bring notes. Instead, he told them his story. "I was just like anyone else," he began. "Lost, grieving, feeling old long before my time. But then I remembered, my body doesn't get to decide everything. My choices do." He shared his daily habits: stretching, strength training, journaling, eating clean, meditating, and staying curious. But more than that, he spoke about purpose. If you don't wake up with something to live for, you'll just start fading. After the talk, dozens of students lined up to speak with him. Some asked for advice, others thanked him. George left the symposium with a new sense of drive. He wasn't just aging gracefully. He was aging in reverse. Back in Maplewood, George's reputation grew. Local newspapers wrote stories about him. Parents brought their kids to meet the energetic old man who runs 5 miles a day. He was invited to speak at wellness retreats, schools, and even senior centers, where he reminded others that it's never too late. One day, while walking through the park, he saw an elderly woman struggling to pick up her small dog. He walked over and helped. "Thank you," she said. "I'm Dorothy. I've seen you jogging here. You're quite the inspiration." George smiled. "Want to join me tomorrow morning?" Dorothy laughed. "Me? Run. Maybe just walk. Who knows? You might surprise yourself." They started meeting each morning, walking side by side. Dorothy told George about her late husband, her grandchildren, and how she used to be a dancer in her youth. "I thought those days were behind me," she said. George looked at her with a grin. "Maybe they're not." Dorothy slowly regained her stamina. She began dancing again, even teaching a beginner's class at the community center. She credited George, but he always insisted, "I just reminded you what you already knew." On George's 80th birthday, the entire town gathered at the community hall. Balloons filled the air and banners read, "To the man who proves age is just a number." Claire came down from college, Mike led a group workout demonstration, and Dorothy baked a healthy carrot cake. During the celebration, George took the mic. "I never thought I'd feel younger at 80 than I did at 60, he said. "But I do. Because I chose to live, not just exist." He looked around the room, at the children laughing, the seniors dancing, and the friends who had become family. "You don't have to be a superhero. Just show up for yourself every day. Most 80-year-olds can't do what I do. But not because they can't, because no one ever told them they could." The crowd erupted in applause. George's story wasn't just about reversing age. It was about rewriting the story we tell ourselves about what's possible. Years passed. George kept moving, kept growing. At 85, he published a memoir called Reverse the Clock, which became a bestseller in the wellness community. His story was featured in magazines, podcasts, and even a small documentary titled The Ageless Spirit. But he never let it go to his head. "Fame is fine," he'd say, "but fulfillment is better." He still woke up at dawn, drank his green smoothie, and jogged through Maplewood. The kids called him Super G. Dorothy still walked with him. Claire eventually became a doctor, specializing in gerontology, and often quoted George in her lectures. One summer evening, George sat on his porch, watching the sunset with a cup of tea in hand. A young man, perhaps in his 20s, approached. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Mr. Whitman?" George smiled. "Just George, son. What can I do for you? My grandfather's struggling. He's given up, says it's too late to change. But I saw your video online. Gave me hope. I was wondering, would you talk to him?" George stood, stretching his still supple limbs. "Tell him,